Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be introducing the brand new Global Inclusion Analytics Dashboard by RW3 CultureWizard. Anyway, welcome again to today's webinar. We're still waiting for a few people to come in, so we're just going to take a moment here. I'm going to ask just to get a sense of it, right, where people are dialing in from today, so that we can get an understanding of the audience for today and get a sense of where folks are coming in. So in that little questions box, it's also good practice so we can use the questions box. Just write in where it is that you're dialed in from today, and we'll kind of read it out loud as we get started here. All right, so it looks like we've got a couple of people here who are from the US, somebody from New Jersey. I'm seeing somebody else from New York, which is where I am as well, so hello. Looks like we have somebody coming in from the UK. A couple of other people as well coming in from the US. So perfect, we got a good global little group here. Someone else coming in from Michigan, someone coming in from Germany, so that's great. All right, well, why don't we get started then? There's still a few people coming in. We had quite a few registered, but we're gonna move right along with today's webinar and get right into the meat of it. And of course, as you know, we will be, as you may know, we will be recording this session. So we will be sending that recording across once we're done. Very high level overview of RW3 before we get started. Right, is we've been around for over 20 years now, providing some of the world's best cultural awareness and global inclusion training using our CultureWizard platform, as well as using our workshops and our mobile app and other resources that we really bring to the table and that we present to your employees, right? Many of you, of course, being clients of RW3. For just high level, I know we've all used this kind of technology by this point, probably a million times, but just in case, very high level overview of GoToWebinar platform. It does default into computer audio. If for whatever reason you can't hear us, you're having a hard time, feel free to dial in by phone. We will be kind of speaking throughout this session, but we expect to answer your questions as you have them, right? So we will, of course, we'll stop at the end for questions, but if you have questions in the moment, write them into that questions box. We'll read them out loud and discuss them and answer them for you. We do, of course, recommend that you maximize the screen and minimizes distraction. And lastly, we are recording today's webinar, so we will send you this recording once we are done with the webinar. So the voice that you're hearing belongs to Jorge Vargas. I am Chief Revenue Officer here at RW3. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am joined today by my colleague, who's got this big old smile on his picture there, so he's going to bring a lot of joy today. My colleague, Joshua Sturdivant, our Chief Technology Officer. So Josh, I'll let you say hello.
Hello, everyone. Looking forward to it.
Okay, and Josh has basically led the project to create the dashboard that we're looking at today. So this is very much his pride and joy, and he's going to show us the platform toward the end, and we're going to be asking him a series of questions. So for those of you who come to these webinars often, this is going to be a slightly different format. There will be some learning that takes place. I'm going to have a few slides, but really it's going to be about questions to Josh that I've come up with, and then of course any questions that you may have as well, right? So it's going to be a much more, I think, conversational approach than what we're typically used to. But before we get to Josh, so Josh, just hang out on the bench for a minute. I'm going to go through the objectives and so forth for today's session. We're going to start off by discussing the importance of global inclusion and defining it and so forth, and then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of this particular dashboard that we're so excited to show all of you. But let's start off with, why does all this matter in the first place, right? Why are we concerned? Why are you concerned with an understanding of inclusion in the workplace? Right now, as we define inclusion, and please feel free to write into the questions box there your own definition of inclusion and what you think of it, what you think of inclusion, or what you think of when you hear the term inclusion. Sorry, I forgot how to speak today. And I'll read those definitions out loud, and then I'll throw up our own definition of inclusion here, right? So I'm seeing that a couple of people are answering already, right? So inclusion is about respect. Inclusion is about involving others in decision making and in conversation. So absolutely, right? It's about all of these things. We at RW3, we define global inclusion as the attitudes and behaviors of individuals spread across the globe that lead to an environment wherein professionals of diverse backgrounds and perspectives feel valued, welcome, and appreciated. And all of our resources, whether it's our global inclusion calculator, whether it's our culture calculator, our working with courses, our country profiles, our courses on microaggressions, neurodiversity, everything that we have is really about how do you make the people around you in your workplace, how do you make them feel valued, welcomed, and appreciated when they're with you, right? What actions can you take? What can you do to create that environment? Right? And this dashboard that we're going to show just goes a little bit deeper into that concept of how can you build inclusion within your workplace, right? And so that's why we wanted to start here. And we also wanted to start here because inclusion is more necessary than ever, right? You know, this is we're in a time, I think, especially in the U.S., right? Those of you in the U.S., I think this will resonate a little bit more, perhaps. But we're in a time right now where you see that there is a little bit of pushback to inclusion initiatives, whether it's you know the focus on creating an inclusive workplace, whether it's talk about safe spaces, whether it's cultural awareness training, all these different things, right? You start to see that people question it. The challenge, of course, with that trend is, you know, I was having this conversation just last week. We run here at RW3, we run a panel of DEI experts for our clients, right? It's a very internal, very conversational group that we run. And, you know, in the conversation, someone said, listen, we know that there's pushback, but if you look around this country and if you look around the planet and workplaces all over the world, there's no going back, right? And the reason why is because, as you can see on the screen here, our workplaces are becoming more and more diverse every day, right? And so what you're seeing here is all these different types of diversity: generational, gender, different ability, racial, ethnic, national origin, right? Majorities are answering that their workplaces are very diverse or diverse. And this is data from 2022, I believe, right? It's been getting more and more diverse every time we run this study. This is from a study that we did here at RW3. And if you're interested in the report, just write that into the questions box and I'll send that over to you if you haven't seen it yet, right? The only categories where the majority said that they don't, or a large number said that they don't know, right? And very diverse or diverse weren't in the majority, or the categories where diversity is not visible, right? So religious diversity as well as sexual orientation diversity, those are not visible. And so you tend to have to know the person a little bit more before you know what their background is in those two categories, right? So that's really the only two categories where we see that. And even there, you do see trends start to emerge that, again, make this argument for the fact that every organization at some point or another, if it isn't already, needs to really invest in inclusion and building an inclusive workplace, right? And whether that's dollars or time or attention, it doesn't really matter, right? What matters is that attention does have to be paid to it in some measure. So that gets us to, how do you measure inclusion? How do you measure a company's culture? How do you measure all of these things within an organization? Now, at RW3, we kind of answer that a little bit with this new dashboard, right? And so that's what we're going to talk about, I think, for the rest of today's call is this today's webinar is this discussion around the global inclusion analytics dashboard, right? And how we use two of our key assessments, our award-winning assessments, right? The Global Inclusion Calculator and the Culture Calculator, and the results that we have from those of over 180,000 individuals who have taken those assessments, right? How we use the aggregated results from those assessments to give you insights into the welfare of inclusiveness within your organization, give you insights into your own company culture, and give you that very high level understanding, right? And we have all this available in a dashboard, which is what we're going to show at the end of the call, but we're going to speak to it pretty much throughout today's webinar, right? The dashboard gives each of you, every client of RW3, the ability to go in and pull all the reports that they need in order to understand what does inclusiveness look like within my organization when we're talking about things like exposure to diversity, when we're talking about things like collaborative leadership, right? And then more importantly, we can look and say, okay, let's run a report on the collaborative leadership metrics for everybody who's a senior manager and above in my organization, right? That's something that we can put at your fingertips, and you can then look and see what that metric is, and you can then start to create your own strategies for, well, how do I create a more collaborative workforce when it comes to my leadership teams, right? Where should I be paying attention? Where should I be focusing my energies and my different strategies as we continue planning out into 2025 and 2026 and onward, right? And that's information that we have. Those of you who are clients of RW3, we can put that pretty much at your fingertips today if you are interested. And those of you who are not clients, we can talk some more about how we can make that available to you. How does all of it work? It's pretty straightforward. So the first step, right, is we have these assessments. We make them available to your population, and each individual gets their own individual results, and they get recommendations, and they're given their score, and they're told, you know, this is the percentile that you're in for this particular category, or you know, on a scale for measuring communication style, you're a very direct communicator, right? All these different results are provided. We then take that data, we anonymize the data, we aggregate the data, right, respecting everyone's privacy during the entire process and with GDPR compliance throughout. And we deliver these reports through the dashboard, right? We deliver a series of different metrics and so forth that you can then pull out. We can provide expert consultation as well with a member of our team who will come in and actually look at the data for you, right? You'll have access to it as well, but they'll look at the data, break down what they're seeing, and then give you their own insights into some recommendations of things that you can be doing as an organization. And then, of course, we are, for those of you who are clients of RW3, you know by now who your client service manager is, right? We are training up your client service manager so they can also provide ongoing support with this report once you acquire access to it, right? So it's a really fantastic addition that we're making here into the RW3 family, so to speak, and we're very excited about all of it. And so, having said that, we're now going to get into some questions. First of all, I'm happy if there are any questions from any of you, but we're actually going to ask a few questions from the creator of this dashboard, Mr. Joshua Sturdivant, the very cheerful, smiley fellow who spoke a few minutes ago. He's been sitting on the bench, but we're going to bring him out now. So, Josh,
Yes.
I've got a few questions here, right? Because I threw a lot of information just now. And I'm sure people are kind of wondering, like, whoa, this sounds really great. What is Jorge talking about? So the first question is, what exactly are you measuring?
That's great. Thanks, Jorge. And just pause for a moment. I'd like to, you mentioned I'm the creator of this tool, and I'd just like to say it's been a team effort and an effort with our clients as well, you know, to build this. So I oversee the technology team that's helped and the product and learning team that's helped to create the platform itself and the assessments that create the underlying data. But also we created this in response to things that our clients have been asking for over the years. So I'll get into that a little more too a little bit later. But what we're measuring are the dimensions that show up in those assessments that Jorge referred to earlier. So I think you might have a slide on this, Jorge, next. Yes. So on the left here, you see the Global Inclusion Calculator, which measures inclusive behavior and other dimensions of inclusive capacity or experience, like exposure to diversity. And then on the right, you've got the Culture Calculator, which measures 8 dimensions of of culture that we've defined. So and it talks about like ways of interacting, your work style, your behaviors, your preferences, and how you like to get things done, or how you like to interact with other people. On the left, with the global inclusion calculator, it's a developmental tool. So what we're looking to do is measuring how you are doing on each of those 9 dimensions of inclusion, compared to a global benchmark of, I think it's almost 190,000 now people who have taken that assessment, global professionals all around the world. You can compare yourself to that benchmark and see how you're performing. And so the goal is to fill in as many of those pie slices as you can with the global inclusion dimensions. You want to be more collaborative as a leader, foster more trust in your relationships, and so on. So that's the goal with that. We want to improve. With the culture calculator, there's no right or wrong answer. There's no good or bad. Where you show up on each of these 8 dimensions of culture, it's just a unique kind of fingerprint for your own approach and again, work style or behaviors. And in learning about how you operate, you're then able to compare to another person or another, the kind of average for a country or for your organization and so on. So that's what those assessments measure. And they're really fantastic individual development tools or individual learning tools, as most of you are familiar with. What we do with analytics is we scale this up to much larger teams or business units or regions. We can measure, or all the way up to the whole organization. So we can, the same kinds of things, we can look at, in the case of inclusion, how you're performing on these different measures of inclusion and give you recommendations. First of all, interpret and give you some insights into why you're performing the way you are on those dimensions, and then give you recommendations for how to improve. In the case of the culture calculator, we're scaling up to look at the whole organization, or again, business units or regions, and saying, here's how this group, or here's how this company operates. What does that mean? What are the implications for that, for some of the bigger organizational initiatives we're undertaking? It could be a massive change initiative, like we're changing our whole offering, or maybe we're acquiring another company that might have a slightly different culture. And so what is our company culture? What does it mean? And how is it compared to something else? Or it could be something as simple as, how should we implement training for a particular group? That might be more hierarchical, let's say. Maybe they need more direction from leadership to implement this new policy or training or whatever it is. And so by learning those characteristics, you can better understand how your company operates and better approach how to implement those things. So 2 different kinds of tools or lenses on your organization, and to give you these insights and give you some fuel to know how to approach working more effectively together.
Okay. Thank you, Josh. And I wanted to then move into the next question a little bit too, right? Because it is, and I see there's one question that just came in about pricing, by the way, and we're going to talk about that in just a moment. But when we're talking about this data, right? These assessments that we've had here at RW3, we've had them now for, in terms of the culture calculator, for a very long time now. Obviously, this is a newer version that was released, I would say, a couple of years ago. And then the global inclusion calculator, which is, I believe, just got a redesign, which is really cool, was also released about 5 years ago now. So we've been collecting this data for a long time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. For the culture calculator, it's over 20 years. Yes, just over 20 years. And then for the inclusion calculator, like you said, 5 years. And hundreds of thousands of people, between the two, close to 500,000 who've completed these assessments over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. And if of the assessments of this kind, especially the global inclusion calculator, right, which measures behavior, inclusive behavior, there really aren't many other resources out there that have quite such a large sample size, right? That's something else to think about. But since we've had these assessments for for a while now. Obviously, this is an idea that didn't just kind of spring out of nowhere, but where did the idea come from for the Global Inclusion Analytics dashboard, right? What was the thought process? And obviously I'm asking, I was there, so I know the answer, but Josh, could you illustrate for us a
Sure.
little bit where that came from?
Yeah, sure. So we've actually, we mentioned the culture calculator has been around for 20 years. Over those 20 years, and I've been with the company for over 18 years now, so I've been there since almost the beginning. We would get questions about, hey, you've got all of this data, you've got people who've completed this assessment. Can you tell us something about these larger groups? And so you might also know, if you're a client of ours, that the culture calculator can be used for like teams. I think I mentioned earlier too. So we get a team of 20 people, and it lets you know about how that team can operate better together. Well, we had some clients who were saying, what about this group of 500 people? Can we learn something about this, our entire leadership, team, for example? And so we would be scaling up these kind of team reports to that level and providing insights for our clients that way. And so this is just global inclusion analytics in general is just a evolution of that kind of approach of providing deeper insights into talent more generally, move from the individual level to these larger groups that our clients have been asking for over the years. The other aspect of it is, especially as we got into with the global inclusion calculator, there really isn't a lot out there. There are a lot of tools out there that measure surveys that measure engagement, as I think most of you would be familiar with, and also that measure inclusion, but measure it in a different way. We call them sentiment surveys, where you're asking things like, how included do I feel in my organization, or leadership supports my efforts, or feelings of belonging and things like that, which are a really great kind of data point to be able to measure how inclusion feels, within your organization. And we think those are great. But what we're missing is what the marketplace is missing, what our clients are missing, is something that says, well, we know how people feel about it. How do we impact that? And so that's what our assessments actually do, are measure people's behaviors and their preferences and how they approach work or how they approach interacting with their colleagues. That adds up to building trust and building inclusion and these other things that we care about and that we measure in those other surveys. So this kind of fills in the gap that's out there, and understanding, okay, now that we know we have these goals for inclusion, we know we have these goals for our workplace culture and improving how people work together, how do we impact it? And by scaling up the data from these individual assessments, we can do that with global analytics. And so the dashboard is the next evolution of providing reports on that by giving you a heads-up display that you can access anytime to see how you're doing on those different factors. And from the cultural perspective or from the inclusion perspective, you can access it 24/7 to see where you're at.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And then, of course, we have access to this data 24/7 now, thanks to all this work from the tech team and yourself and everybody who was involved in it. I guess I phrased the question somewhat cynically, but what is the value of this data? And well, we've talked about the sample size, so we don't have to speak to that again. I think the hundreds of thousands numbers is impressive, mm-hmm. right? And gives security about some of the inferences that are made. But what is the value of this data for an organization? And I do have a slide here I know that we had prepared that you can speak to, so mm-hmm. I'm going to turn it onto there.
Yeah, that's great, and I won't read through all of these necessarily. You can do that on your own, and but there are a lot of different ways that our clients use this, and where this data has been really valuable. So I'll give you a couple of examples. But it really is, for most of you on the call, probably in like either a D&I role or a training role, maybe mobility or these other kinds of HR functions. It helps you get insights into how to have an impact, a more a measurable impact in what you're doing. So just to put it most generally. So whether in the case of training, one common use case is to better tailor your training to your organization's specific needs. So by measuring, for example, on the inclusion calculator, we measure bias awareness is one of our dimensions, right? One way to, if you score poorly on bias awareness, if you need to improve there, one way to improve that is by delivering bias awareness training. We have a course on overcoming implicit bias. So you could, if you see your organizational score is low, you can create a bias, or you can deliver that training and improve those scores and measure again to see if those scores have improved over time. But you can also drill in deeper to look at different segments in the organization and maybe see that, oh, this particular team in North America is having a challenge, or maybe the manufacturing unit is scores a little differently on collaborative leadership. Maybe we need a special leadership program for them. So it helps you tailor and get more kind of ROI from your training by being able to pick and choose how you deliver and what kinds of training are appropriate for what groups or for your whole organization. That's one application that's pretty common. Another one is in the case of culture. If you have the culture assessment, being able to by understanding how your culture operates, you can. There's all kinds of different strategic initiatives you can approach differently based on that. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but for example, we have a client who's applying the technology that they create to a completely different solution now than they did in the past. For years and years and years, they were built to do a particular thing, and now they're shifting to something completely different with the same technology. In order to do that, they have to collaborate across cultures and around the world and across functions in a way that they've never had to do before. So they work with us to look at their data, understand more about their inclusive capability for collaboration, for collaborative leadership, for building trust with these new teams that are working together. They also look at their culture scores to look at hierarchy around the world and how much direction different teams might need and so on, so that they can affect this whole global strategic change in a way that's intelligent and kind of, it's a global strategy, but so that it's locally relevant to the different groups around the world to achieve their goals. So they're checking into this data all the time to see how it's improving, how it's changing, and to tailor their programs around the world. So that's kind of so imagine, for whatever your role is, imagine being able to again make something rather than kind of I think we call it like spraying and praying training. Instead of doing that, you're instead delivering the focused energy towards the goals you're trying to achieve.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's really what it is, right? It's arming you up with information so that you can make the right calls and focus where you need to be focusing, right?
Right.
So it's really fantastic information that we can put into your hands. So just a couple of more questions. And the first one is, I mentioned in the beginning, right, that there's additional support, right, beyond. So there's the assessments, then you have the dashboard, which is powered from data that's taken out of the individual assessment results, and then there was talk of further support, right? All these other things that we can do. So can you speak to that a little bit more, Josh?
Yeah, sure. Just briefly, you have your client service representatives who you work with who are always available for all kinds of support for promotion and so on. So that's an important resource I want to always remind you is available to you. But in the case of our analytics practice, in addition to just providing the data that you can have on demand whenever you want, we offer a service where we'll meet with you, understand what if you have specific goals or challenges you're looking to overcome, whether it's organizationally or with specific groups. We'll meet with you and your stakeholders, better understand what those are, run the numbers, look at the reports, and maybe do some deeper dive analysis than are available out of the box. will interpret the data that comes back to us about that and tell you how it impacts the goals for the strategies you're trying to implement. We'll then give you recommendations on how to achieve your goals. And that might include training and other kinds of solutions like I've described, or it might be other kinds of like policy and other programs that we can suggest based on our experience with other clients. So that's a deeper dive kind of consulting service that's also available to you through our team.
Absolutely. So, and Josh, the next piece, of course, is can we see the platform? So I'm going to actually now hand it over to you to be the presenter. While we do that,
yeah, that's great.
I'm just making you the presenter now. So you should be able to share your screen in just a moment. So while that comes on, I wanted to answer the pricing question that had come in, right? So the question was the cost of implementing and analyzing the survey. So for many of you, you have the assessments already in your library, right? You may only have one assessment and not the other, in which case there's individual per client pricing based on what you're missing. So that first part is more for the client service manager to work with you. For the actual dashboard itself, we are doing introductory pricing right now because this is being released. The formal release date is actually September the 23rd. So we are doing some introductory pricing right now, basically giving you a range of prices between $2,500 per year on one end, all the way up to about $7,500 on the other end. Again, there are some client-specific exclusions to that, but it's a very, very low price that we're offering here, and it's actually very exciting because we want to make sure that you have access to this data right now, right, and that you're able to really take advantage of it and really start to see the benefits of this fantastic report and fantastic tool that we're making available here. So, having said that, Josh, now I'm going to turn it over to you to show the rest of the platform itself.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so we've been leading up to this and referring to the data for a while now. Here is the Global Inclusion Analytics dashboard. So, and I just want to point out briefly, this is part of a launch as well of sort of this new kind of client enablement portal that we created. You know, you have this wonderful CultureWizard site available for everyone else in the organization. We've made a special portal just for you. So if you're one of our clients now, you can access your learning metrics, your platform usage, what we call toolkits, so like promotional materials and things like that, and other kinds of support documentation under there, and then a way to reach out to your client service manager directly from the platform as well. So this will be something that's available to everyone, and then if you sign up for the Inclusion Analytics service, these will have the data populated as well for you. So this first page of the platform is the dashboard itself. We call it a dashboard because it's kind of like this heads-up view of the key reports that you care the most about. So these are all taken from these deeper dive reports that we'll show in a minute, and you can kind of pick your favorites and bookmark them up here on the dashboard page so that you can come and see it whenever you like when you sign into the site. In a future iteration of this, we're also going to be upgrading our learning platform metrics so that you can bring those metrics, you can surface them on the dashboard as well. So you could do something like compare your bias awareness scores to the consumption of the bias, overcoming implicit bias course that I mentioned earlier, and see how those relate as well. So you can see the impact of the training that solutions that you're putting out there right in this one view. So I'll, without spending more time on each of these, that's just how the dashboard works. Let me go into these reports themselves. So you see this is organized now first by these tabs for each of the assessments, the inclusion index and the culture calculator. And then we have each of those assessments have 3 layers or levels of reporting. The first one is a summary report. So in the case of the inclusion calculator, again, we're comparing to a global benchmark. We call the Global Inclusion Index. So this black circle here is that index, that benchmark. And then for your organization, you'll be able to see, do we score a little bit above it, below it, or so on, and then how far above or below the average. So you can see the global average for flexible thinking, for example, is 18.22. But this company scores about 6% above it, 1 point above it, but that translates to about 6%, which puts them in kind of the high average category for flexible thinking. And then we have some, description of what that dimension means and so on. So for each of these, you can see whether you're scoring, how you're doing against that global average. You can also switch this now to see your sector. So compared to other kind of peer organizations, how you score as well. I don't know if I loaded that data ahead of time, so I won't spend time on that. But you can. So if you're in, for example, the energy industry or sector, you can compare it to other companies that are competing, with your business or also for your talent, right? So you can kind of see how you compare. This is just another view on the right-hand side of the same data, with that black line again being the global average. So you can see when it was last updated. The data gets updated on a nightly basis, and then the total number of people who have taken the assessment in your organization. You can then pin any report you'd like to the dashboard, like I mentioned earlier, and you can export the data from it to a CSV format. And the data that gets exported is essentially what you see on the page. So either be columns in this case for global average, company average, percentage difference, and so on for each dimension, and that gets into CSV. So you can bring that into other data analysis tools you might have, maybe like Microsoft BI or something like that. You can then correlate that with other data. We have some clients who use it to compare, for example, to like engagement surveys. So they could see, oh, engagement is kind of low with this particular group or maybe across the organization. I wonder if that correlates with our collaborative leadership scores, on this. Maybe there's a leadership challenge we need to adjust, or trustworthiness or so on. So that's what you can do with exporting as well. The next layer down from this, so we see the overview and the summary. Now, what's driving those scores? So now this is where we get into the distribution of scores within your organization. So how are people scoring across the whole organization for each of these dimensions? So we can see here kind of a little bit more of a bell curve for like the global average for this dimension of trustworthiness. But our company scores show these like bumps along the way, which means that there are these different cohorts that are scoring similar to each other throughout this dimension. This one's kind of similar to the global average, but let's see if we can find one that's quite a bit different. Yeah, so you can see here like this particular company is scoring quite well compared to the global average, but there are some differences across the organization. Why does that matter? It matters like when we talk about the culture calculator, for example. I mentioned like work-life balance, or we call it motivation, which deals with work-life balance. If you're trying to implement, let's say like changing your work from home policy, you might want to look at that dimension and see, okay, we've got people with very different, if it's all, everyone's kind of the same, you can implement the same policy with that in mind and be okay. But if it's, some people are very status oriented, some people are very work-life balance oriented, maybe you have to approach that with consideration for this wide range of different approaches to work-life balance, as an example, and that can apply to any of our dimensions. But that tells you about the whole organization. Now we can dig into where are these cohorts within the company? Where are these groups of people that score differently on these dimensions? So in this kind of demo site that we have set up, we just have a few different segments. One is age, another one is country of interest, gender, and job level. But I'd like you to imagine you can update this to be business units. It could be regions. It could be job functions and things like that. So we could look at APAC compared to EMEA, or the finance group compared to manufacturing, or something like that, right? So it lets you compare you choose a segment, then you choose a company average, or whether you want to compare the segments to the company average, or to the global average. So the global average tells you just in general from that benchmark, how are we doing? But if you compare it to the company, it kind of normalizes it to, okay, our company maybe scores better or lower, higher or lower than the global average, but how does Argentina score compared to, or the finance unit compared to our company average? So it normalizes the scores. And that can be really, really helpful too. Great. So that's the three layers of reporting: the overview, the distribution, and segments. So the only kind of difference I point out with our culture calculator is, again, we're measuring something a little different. We're not looking at improving those scores necessarily. We're looking at how, the different characteristics across the organization. So these are our company averages on these different dimensions of culture. We have some clients who use this during the onboarding process so that they can look at what are our, thousands and thousands of people who work here. Just on average, how are we when it comes to communication? Are we more direct or indirect? When somebody new is hired, they'll then be able to see that, wow, this is a very direct organization globally. That's something, if I'm more indirect, what are some challenges I might come up against, and how can I overcome those? It's not necessarily with the goal of assimilating to the company culture, but just knowing how people tend to do things there. And some organizations have very strong corporate cultures that develop, as you're probably aware. So this is a really helpful tool in that context as well. But it can be used for a lot of different scenarios, like I mentioned earlier about strategic initiatives and so on as well, or work-life balance. So you can see the overall overview. And then the same thing, dig into a distribution to understand how those scores might differ across the organization. So can you do, the kind of question you're answering here again is, can we do something that's global here, or do we need separate considerations for different people around the world or around the organization? So that's what you're getting at with distribution. And then with the segment report, we can pinpoint specific unique challenges or areas where we're having success around the world or with different groups. And we, again, in the case of culture, we're looking at the dimension and then the segment to see how we score compared to the company average in this case. So that was a little bit of a whirlwind of a tour of the dashboard and data there. I just want to see if there's any questions that have come in. Or if you have any questions for it.
Yeah, sorry, I was going into a long soliloquy and then realized I was muted. So yeah, we did get a couple. One I answered privately, but another one came in asking about the data collection itself, right? So in terms of the segments and where that data is coming in from, if it's coming in through the integration with the LMS, right, which we do integrate directly with the LMS using SCORM API or using single sign-on, depending on what the need is, or if it's being collected in another way. So it's actually being collected when they take the assessment. There's a query that asks for that information, or at registration, and it's very much driven by you, the client, right? If that's something that you want us to collect at time of registration, we can do that, absolutely. And again, because of the way that we handle the data, it's all fully compliant and kept private and so forth and so on. Now, the only other thing I wanted to just show quickly here
can I just add to that really briefly, Jorge? So we do have some clients where, for whatever reason, we are not collecting a particular thing, like say business unit at registration, and we want to do a refresh of the data for these reports. So we can take an import as well, where we'll set up a secure file transfer. You give us your HR data for a particular, with business units, we'll import it, and then you'll have it available too.
Right. And then the other question to come in was more about the assessments themselves. So I just wanted to give folks a very quick refresher because I know we're pretty much at time. And if there are other questions, feel free to write them in. If you're interested, by the way, in a one-on-one demo with your client service manager and either Josh or myself, we're happy to do that. Just write that into the questions window here, and we will your client service manager will reach out. If you're not a client, then I'll have someone from the sales team reach out to you as well. We can walk you through this directly. So just write that into the questions box and we'll do that. But anyway, by way of reminder, I just wanted to show folks the 2 assessments that we're talking about based on one of the queries that came in. So the first one we've been talking about a little bit is the Global Inclusion Calculator, right? It's this one here, and this is the output, right, for the individual. So again, this is for me, the individual, right, showing trustworthiness scores, showing the score for intercultural skills and so forth, giving recommendations, all very actionable. And then we also have the culture calculator, right, which is the other assessment that we were speaking to, right, which measures the 8 dimensions of culture, things like hierarchy, change, and formality, right? Josh was talking about motivation a little bit at one point, right? And that's where all of this lives, right? And you have your own individual results. You can add in country averages. You can add in people, right? So for instance, here we can select contacts, and eventually a list of contacts shows up, and we can add in a person and so forth and so on, right? So that's the culture calculator as well. But again, if you are interested in learning more individually, we're happy to jump on a call with you. I see a couple of you have asked for that already, and feel free to just write that into the questions box. If you have access or want access to one of the assessments and you're realizing maybe you don't have it in your library, we can talk about adding that into your license as well. We can give you, we can add that in for your employees as well. So just feel free to write that in. We'll be happy to assist. On that note, unless there's any other questions, we are now essentially at time. So I wanted to, first of all, thank you, all of you, for attending today. And then I also wanted to thank you, Josh, for walking us through everything and answering the questions that were posed to you. And I'm really doing a great job of showing the dashboard to us and making it come alive.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. We will have another webinar in a couple of weeks, so look for a note about that. Otherwise, if you're interested in more information, feel free to write it in. And unless there's any other questions, I am going to wrap up here, and thank you all again for attending. All right, wonderful. All right, bye everybody. Bye, Josh.
Bye all. Thanks.